Okay, check this out. Andy?
Now it's through this life I ramble. I've seen lots of funny men. Some will rob you with a 6-gun, some with a fountain pen.
Right, some with a fountain pen. I'm here to talk about traditional American folk music and why it still matters. Ultimately, I'd like to focus on the work of a specific artist, but first, a little background. I guess, what is it? Why do we care? Traditional American folk music is among our most authentic art forms. At its best, it's something uniquely rooted in the human experience. Traditionally, it might be songs handed down from generation to generation, telling the stories of a specific region. Examples might include the Great Flood of 1927. If you're a blues man, you might recognize the song High Water Risin' by Charlie Patton. Another example of a regional song passed down might have to do with trains. Examples include the Wabash Cannonball or the wreck of the old 97. Or another regional thing perhaps passed down from generation to generation are stories about outlaws. That clip we just heard, that's from a song called about Pretty Boy Floyd, the outlaw. Now, if you first hear the topic of traditional American folk music and you think, it just belongs to old hippies or to middle-aged white guys like me, or if you should think that it can't have any application to us in 2014, or that if it can't apply in a more contemporary urban environment, I disagree. And I'd ask you to consider a couple things. Number one, it is a racially integrated art form. Examples include the classic icon from Woodstock, Richie Havens. A more contemporary example would be the Grammy Award-winning Carolina Chocolate Drops. And my unsolicited free music tip for the day, if you're not hip to her, go check out the beautiful and the beautifully talented singer Valerie June. Second, let's talk about content. You know, I think it's easy to pick a specific hip-hop or R&B artist or song and criticize it or that person as being crude and vulgar. I know that I find myself doing it from time to time. But another person might step outside that and say, they're just being honest. That song and that choice of words is just conveying the human experience of that particular artist, or if not that artist's intended audience. And the same thing can be said about traditional American folk music. The quick point is, no one has the corner on political incorrectness. If you know this music, you know there's a whole separate subcategory known simply as murder songs. Classic example is a song called On the Banks of the Ohio. A guy goes for a walk with his girlfriend. He asks her to marry him. She says no. He cuts her with a knife and throws her in the river to drown. Late in his career, the great Johnny Cash put out 3 separate different box sets that kind of memorialized the various aspects of his musical canon. They were respectively titled Love, God, Murder. And if you want a perfect example of just punk rock attitude, you think before we had a name for it, punk rock attitude and outlaw crazy, check out this clip.
99 years in the Folsom Pen, 99 years underneath high ground. I can't forget the day I shut that bag down. Come on, you gotta listen.
All right, that's Johnny Cash with his cover of Cocaine Blues recorded live at Folsom Prison. And I think the message is that these folk artists, they didn't grow up maybe with gang violence or with a crack dealer down in the corner. But you know, they did grow up knowing poverty, alcoholism, racial injustice, lynchings, natural disasters, and the effects of 2 world wars. At its best, traditional American folk music has conveyed this shared human experience, both good and bad. Now, I'm sure that there are many examples. I know that there are many examples out there, but I could only pick one. So to drive this home, I'd like to talk specifically about one songwriter, the people that he encountered, and the stories that he told. And if I'm lucky, if we're all lucky, I'll take us to the human story within the human story. Woody Guthrie was born in Oklahoma in 1912. By the age of 14, he was supporting himself busking. He's ultimately credited with writing over 1,000 songs, but he did more than that. He wrote novel, he was an illustrator, he wrote children's material. Woody Guthrie is largely credited with being the first person to use music as an agent for social change. At the other end of the spectrum, Woody Guthrie is also largely credited with being the first person to establish folk music as a commercially viable genre within the music industry machine. And I think to really understand anyone, you have to put it in context. So here's a little bit about the life and times and the events that shaped the life and times of Woody Guthrie. 1929, stock market crash in the beginning of the Great Depression. 1931, beginning of a 7-year drought in the American Southwest. 1932, beginning of the Great Dust Storms. These two things came together to create a mass migration of people from the Southwest towards California in hopes of, if not making a fortune, at least starting over, making a living wage. Most of these people had been farmers or agricultural workers. 1935, Woody Guthrie joins that migration of Dust Bowl refugees, leaves Oklahoma for California. Woody Guthrie walked, he hitchhiked, he rode the rails. He literally sang for his supper, performing at hobo camps and migrant worker camps along the way. But if you know your history, you know it didn't really work out for these folks. They weren't greeted with open arms. California had been hit hard by the Depression as well. Most of these people had been farmers, agricultural workers. There were already Mexican and Asian migrant workers chasing those same agricultural jobs. They were lumped together in one group and referred to as Okies. This is a derogatory term. They were looked at as impoverished and a drain on the system. 1936, the Los Angeles Police Department established what became known as the Bum Patrol. They literally sent police to the California border to intercept newcomers. Those without a viable means of financial support turned away. So imagine this. You've lost everything or nearly everything back in Oklahoma. You strapped what few possessions you have left to the top of the Model A. You've driven for days only to be turned away at the border. And this is American turning away American. This is the United States of America. This is the human experience that Woody Guthrie encountered, that Woody Guthrie lived and he documented. 1938, the song God Bless America is tearing it up on the charts. Sung by Kate Smith, it's a huge hit on the radio. Woody Guthrie doesn't get it. This is not the America that he's living and seeing. Woody Guthrie wrote a song in response. But what he did is he actually wrote what I strongly believe is the greatest song ever written about the United States of America. That song is This Land Is Your Land. Written in 1940, recorded in 1941, commercially released around 1955, This Land Is Your Land was not only meant as a response to God Bless America, but as a sarcastic response. Now, I don't know about you, but I can't remember a time in my life without the music of Woody Guthrie, even if I was too young to realize it was the music of Woody Guthrie. I was taught This Land Is Your Land when I was in school. This was some kind of happy sing-along. But I'll let you in on a secret. Miss Cuff at Washington Elementary School in Bryan, Ohio, didn't teach us the whole song. Come to find out, she didn't teach us what are now known as the missing verses. We know about them because Woody Guthrie sang this song at rallies and at camps, but when he recorded it, the version that was originally released didn't include some common verses that he was known to sing live. It wasn't until 1997, during the digital transfer process, that a master recording was unearthed that actually contained Woody Guthrie singing these words in his own voice. As I went walking there, I saw a sign there. And on the sign, it said, "No trespassing." But on the other side, it didn't say nothing. That side was meant for you and me. Okay? And there's a second verse that was never recorded. But again, we know about it because Woody performed this song live, and the handwritten lyric sheet exists. In the shadow of the steeple, I saw my people. By the relief office, I see my people as they stood there hungry. I stood there asking, is this land made for you and me? All right, so let's gather that up for just a second. Clearly, that song had was intended to have a much greater social and political impact than the happy little sing-along thing that we know or that we thought that we knew. And it's these missing lyrics that really injects this song with the human element. And it's that human element, to me, that really spins this thing on its head and elevates it to a really great work of art. Now, my personal journey to the music of Woody Guthrie also includes the song Deportee. 1948, an airplane was carrying a group of Mexican migrant workers, returning them from California back to Mexico. That plane crashed in Los Gatos Canyon. 32 people were on board. Everyone died. The news accounts that Woody Guthrie saw in the media identified the 4 crew members. The 28 passengers were just listed as deportees. That angered Woody. He wrote what's considered a protest song. First, it was a poem. He wrote a poem called Plane Crash at Los Gatos. That poem became the song Deportees. That song has eventually been covered by the likes of Dolly Parton, Bruce Springsteen, Billy Bragg, Ani DeFranco, Old Crow Medicine Show. My personal favorite version is by another guy from Oklahoma named Jimmy LaFave. All 28 of the deportees were buried in a mass grave in Fresno County, California. There's a tombstone, but it didn't say anything. It was blank. It wasn't until the year 2000 that someone anonymously donated a tombstone that simply reads, "Here lies the bodies of 28 Mexican nationals that died in a plane crash." Woody Guthrie's version of the story goes like this. Well, look at this, guys. Paper. The crops are all in, and the peaches are rotting. The oranges piled high in their creosote dumps. They're flying them back to the Mexican border to pay all their money to wade back again. Goodbye to my Juan. Goodbye, Rosalita. Adios, mi amigos, Jesus and Maria. You won't have your names when you ride the big airplane. All they will call you will be deportees. So let's stop. Now let's see if we can get our arms around that. We know a little bit of the background now of Woody Guthrie. We know the story behind these 2 great songs. And let's bring that forward to 2014, to right here, right now, and specifically to this past summer. You've heard a little bit about this today already. And I don't care where you come down on this politically. That is not the point. But I think it's a fairly objective statement to say that the United States of America still wrestles with the issue of illegal immigration. I think it's also an objective statement to say that recently there's been a new twist to that, and that's been the influx of unaccompanied minor children, not from Mexico, but from deeper in Latin America. This summer, Rick Perry, the governor of Texas, made headlines when in response to this crisis, he deployed 1,000 Texas National Guard troops to help guard his state's southern border at the cost of nearly $12 million a month. Now, I know this is not an apples-to-apples comparison, but I don't think it takes much imagination, nor is it too much of a stretch, to see a similarity between the 1936 bomb blockade of the Los Angeles Police Department. Also in July, a specific group of approximately 140 of these Latin American minors were received in Texas. Due to overcrowding, they were flown to San Diego, California. In San Diego, they were placed on a bus. The purpose was to bus them to Murrieta, California, where they would be processed at a border patrol station there. That bus was now famously intercepted by a group of approximately 125 protesters. They shouted down that bus, essentially. They yelled things like, "Not in my backyard," "Return to sender," and "Deport them." Again, granted, not an apples-to-apples comparison, but I don't think it's too big of a stretch to see some parallels with the backstory of the song "Deportees," or the general treatment of our own Dust Bowl refugees in the United States in the 1930s and the 1940s. I'll give you one more example, all right, about Woody Guthrie and what he identified and how it's still with us today. That clip we heard when I first walked out, been robbed with a fountain pen, I'm not 100% sure what the Occupy movement was all about. I think it meant different things to different people. But Woody Guthrie wrote those lyrics too. And I'm pretty sure that at the core of that movement were thousands upon thousands of people that felt they'd been robbed with a fountain pen. Now, if you get a chance to listen to these original recordings by these artists as opposed to covers, I encourage you to do it. I'd like to hear your input or your reaction. You might very well say, I don't get the vocals, this high kind of nasal sound, or the rudimentary guitar playing, or the production values at this point are just so outdated. But with this backstory, I bet you'll never tell me that the songwriting is irrelevant. So please understand that when we talk about American folk music, it is something that can indeed still apply here today in our life and in a more contemporary urban environment. And the reason it has that permanency, or that resiliency, is because of its uniqueness as an art form, being at its best deeply embedded in the human spirit. Those old songs still have stories to tell and lessons to teach. Thank you.